Picture this. A man stands on stage wearing a black leather jacket that's become more iconic than any business suit. Behind him, numbers flash that would make most people dizzy. $3 trillion. That's not a typo. The company he founded in a Denny's restaurant booth is now worth more than the entire GDP of most countries. His name is Jensen Huang, and he's the CEO who saw the future when everyone else was blind. But here's what makes this story absolutely insane. Jensen didn't come from money. He didn't have Silicon Valley connections. He arrived in America as a kid who barely spoke English, lived with relatives in a rough neighborhood, and worked as a dishwasher and busboy to survive. Today, he's not just a billionaire. He's the man who literally powers artificial intelligence. Every ChatGPT query, every AI image, every autonomous vehicle, it all runs on his chips. The entire AI revolution exists because of what this man built. This isn't just another rags to riches story. This is the story of a man who bet everything on a technology that didn't exist yet, who survived near bankruptcy 3 times, who refused to quit when experts told him his vision was impossible. This is the story of how Jensen Huang became the most important CEO in technology, and possibly the most important business leader of our generation. Jensen Huang's story begins in Tainan City, Taiwan, in 1963. His father was a chemical engineer, his mother a teacher. On the surface, it looked like a stable middle-class life. But Taiwan in the 1960s was a pressure cooker. The island lived under constant threat from mainland China. Families like the Huangs knew that their children needed opportunities that Taiwan couldn't guarantee. They needed to get to America. When Jensen was just 9 years old, his parents made an agonizing decision. They would send Jensen and his older brother to live with relatives in the United States. Imagine being a 4th grader, barely speaking English, saying goodbye to your parents with no idea when you'd see them again. That's exactly what happened. Jensen and his brother boarded a plane to America, 2 kids with a couple of suitcases, heading into the complete unknown. But here's where the story takes a dark turn. The relatives Jensen was supposed to stay with weren't prepared to take care of 2 boys. Instead, they enrolled Jensen and his brother at a place called Oneida Baptist Institute in Kentucky. The family thought it was a prestigious prep school. It wasn't. It was essentially a school for troubled youth, kids who'd been kicked out of everywhere else. Jensen found himself sharing a room with a kid who had a switchblade. Welcome to America. Most kids would have crumbled. Jensen adapted. He learned English by immersing himself completely. He took on every job available at the school. Cleaning bathrooms, washing dishes, working as a busboy in the cafeteria. While other kids from privileged backgrounds were playing sports and hanging out, Jensen was learning the value of hard work in the most brutal way possible. But something incredible was happening inside Jensen's mind. Instead of feeling sorry for himself, instead of being angry at his parents or the world, he was becoming tougher. He was learning that survival meant outworking everyone. He was learning that being underestimated was actually an advantage. And he was developing a work ethic that would later become legendary in Silicon Valley. After a year, his parents finally arrived in America and the family reunited in Oregon. But the experience had changed Jensen permanently. He'd seen the bottom. He'd survived it. Nothing would ever seem that hard again. This mindset, this ability to endure what others couldn't, this would become his secret weapon in business. In high school, Jensen discovered something that would change his life: ping pong. Not just playing it casually, but mastering it obsessively. He became so good that he was Oregon's ping pong champion. Why does this matter? Because it revealed something fundamental about Jensen's psychology. He didn't just want to be good at things. He wanted to be the absolute best. Second place wasn't in his vocabulary. Jensen enrolled at Oregon State University to study electrical engineering. This was the early 1980s, and the computer revolution was just beginning. Personal computers were transitioning from hobbyist toys to serious machines. Jensen was fascinated by every aspect of computing, but especially by the hardware, the chips and processors that made everything work. He graduated with his bachelor's degree and immediately enrolled at Stanford University for his master's in electrical engineering. Stanford in the mid-1980s was ground zero for the computing revolution. Companies like Apple and Intel were nearby. Venture capital was flowing. The entire Bay Area was buzzing with the energy of people building the future. At Stanford, Jensen met Lori Mills, an electrical engineering student who would become his wife. By all accounts, Lori was brilliant, driven, and shared Jensen's passion for technology. They married while still in graduate school. Lori would later become a successful businesswoman herself, eventually becoming CEO of a company. They remain married today, a 40-plus-year partnership that survived everything Silicon Valley threw at them. After graduating from Stanford in 1984, Jensen joined Advanced Micro Devices, better known as AMD. He was a chip designer working on microprocessors. Then he moved to LSI Logic, where he rose to become director of Coreware. He was good at his job. Really good. But something was eating at him. Working for other people, executing other people's visions, it wasn't enough. Jensen had ideas. Big ideas. Ideas that his employers thought were crazy. It's 1993. Jensen is 30 years old. He's sitting in a booth at Denny's restaurant in San Jose, California, with two colleagues, Chris Malachowski, an engineer he worked with at Sun Microsystems, and Curtis Preem, another chip designer with an impressive resume. They're meeting to discuss an idea that most people in tech thought was insane. Jensen's vision was simple but revolutionary: create a specialized computer chip designed specifically for graphics. Not general computing like Intel's chips. Not for business applications. For graphics. For making images on screens move faster and look better. The target market? Video game players. His colleagues at his previous jobs had laughed at this idea. Graphics? Video games? This was considered a toy market, not serious business. The real money was in business computing, servers, productivity software. Nobody was going to build a billion-dollar company selling chips to gamers. Or so everyone thought. But Jensen saw something others didn't. He understood that creating realistic 3D graphics required enormous computational power, different from what traditional CPUs provided. He realized that whoever solved the graphics problem would unlock entirely new categories of computing. And he had an intuition, not yet fully formed, that graphics processing would eventually be useful for much more than just games. The three men decided to go for it. They would start their own company. They would build a graphics chip that would blow away everything on the market. They just needed a name. Someone suggested Nvision, but that was taken. So they went with Nvidia, playing off the Latin word Nvidia, meaning envy. They wanted other companies to envy their technology. Starting Nvidia required money. Jensen and his co-founders put in their own savings, but that wasn't nearly enough. They needed venture capital. Convincing VCs to invest in a graphics chip company wasn't easy, but eventually they raised $20 million. In 1993, that was a substantial amount for a startup. They rented office space in Santa Clara and got to work. The first product was called the NV1, released in 1995. It was supposed to revolutionize PC gaming. It didn't. The chip used an unusual rendering technique based on quadratic texture mapping, which was technically interesting but incompatible with the direction the gaming industry was heading. Microsoft was pushing a standard called Direct 3D that used triangle-based rendering. Nvidia's NV1 didn't support it. The chip flopped. Completely. The company had bet everything on this product, and it failed in the market. Nvidia was bleeding money. Employees were worried about their jobs. Investors were questioning whether Jensen knew what he was doing. The company that was supposed to change computing had maybe 6 months of cash left. This is where most startups die. The founders give up, the investors cut their losses, everyone moves on. But Jensen refused to quit. Instead, he did something that would define his entire career. He went directly to their biggest customer, Sega, and told them the brutal truth. The NV1 wasn't going to succeed. They needed to build something completely different. But they were out of money. Jensen asked Sega to fund the development of their next chip, the NV2, even though the NV1 had failed. Shockingly, Sega agreed. They gave Nvidia $5 million to develop a new chip. But there was a problem. Sega wanted the chip to work with their game console, which was already outdated technology. Building a chip for a dying console would mean Nvidia's next product would also fail. Jensen faced an impossible choice. Take Sega's money and build a chip he knew would fail, keeping the company alive a bit longer but with no real future. Or burn the bridge with their biggest customer and bet everything on a completely new approach. Most CEOs would have taken the safe money. Jensen didn't. He canceled the Sega deal. He took the remaining cash reserves and redirected the entire company toward building a chip that supported Microsoft's Direct 3D standard and the emerging industry standards. The team had months to pull this off, or the company would die. They worked 100-hour weeks. Jensen slept in the office more than he slept at home. In 1997, Nvidia released the Riva 128. Finally, they got it right. The chip was fast, it was compatible with industry standards, and gamers loved it. It became one of the best-selling graphics chips of its time. Nvidia was suddenly profitable. The company that was months from bankruptcy was now a player in the graphics card market. But Jensen wasn't satisfied with just being a player. He wanted Nvidia to dominate. In 1999, the company released the GeForce 256, and Jensen made a bold declaration. This wasn't just a graphics card, it was the world's first graphics processing unit, or GPU. He literally invented the term GPU. This wasn't just marketing. The GeForce 256 could perform complex graphical calculations independently from the CPU, fundamentally changing what computers could do. The GeForce was a massive success. Nvidia went public in January 1999, right at the height of the dot-com boom. Suddenly, Jensen wasn't just a CEO fighting for survival. He was running a publicly traded company valued in the billions. He was a success story, a vindication of his vision. But the story was far from over. In fact, the hardest challenges were still ahead. In the early 2000s, the video game industry was shifting. Home gaming consoles were becoming more powerful and more popular. Microsoft was entering the market with the Xbox. Sony's PlayStation 2 was dominating. Nintendo was planning new hardware. These companies needed chips for their consoles, and the contracts were worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Nvidia won the contract to provide the GPU for Microsoft's original Xbox. It should have been a triumph. It wasn't. The deal terms were terrible for Nvidia. As Xbox sales grew, Microsoft renegotiated the contract to pay Nvidia less per chip. Nvidia was doing all the technical work but seeing less and less profit. Jensen later called this deal one of the worst decisions he'd made. Then the dot-com bubble burst. Tech stocks crashed. Nvidia's stock price plummeted from its highs. The company that had been valued in the billions was suddenly worth a fraction of that. Investors who'd gotten rich on paper watched their gains evaporate. The pressure on Jensen was immense. To make matters worse, a new competitor emerged, ATI Technologies. ATI released graphics cards that were competing directly with Nvidia's products, and in some cases, beating them. The battle for graphics card supremacy became brutal. Every product cycle was a war. One bad chip could mean losing market share permanently. In 2002, Nvidia released the GeForce FX, a high-end graphics card that was supposed to crush the competition. It didn't. The card ran hot, it was loud, and in some benchmarks, ATI's cards performed better. For the first time since the Riva 128 saved the company, Nvidia released a product that was considered disappointing. The stock took another hit. Employees were demoralized. Here's where Jensen made the decision that would ultimately make him one of the most important CEOs in modern history. In the mid-2000s, while everyone else in the graphics card industry was focused purely on making games look prettier, Jensen had a different vision. He looked at Nvidia's GPUs and realized something profound. These chips were incredibly good at performing thousands of calculations simultaneously. This capability, called parallel processing, wasn't just useful for graphics. It could revolutionize scientific computing. Traditional CPUs, like the ones Intel made, were designed to be generalists. They could do many different types of tasks, but they processed information sequentially, one instruction at a time. GPUs worked differently. They could process thousands of operations at once. This made them terrible for some tasks, but absolutely incredible for others, particularly anything involving massive amounts of data and repetitive calculations. Jensen saw applications everywhere. Climate modeling, molecular dynamics, artificial intelligence, oil exploration, drug discovery. Anywhere scientists needed to crunch enormous datasets, Nvidia's GPUs could help. But there was a problem. Programming GPUs was incredibly difficult. They were designed for graphics, and making them do scientific computing required specialized knowledge that few people had. So in 2006, Nvidia released CUDA, which stands for Compute Unified Device Architecture. CUDA was a platform that allowed programmers to use NVIDIA GPUs for general-purpose computing, not just graphics. Researchers could write code in familiar programming languages and harness the parallel processing power of GPUs. Jensen wasn't just selling hardware anymore. He was building an ecosystem. The problem? Almost nobody cared at first. Game developers didn't need CUDA, they just wanted faster graphics. Business customers were skeptical about using gaming hardware for serious work. And the investment in CUDA was costing NVIDIA millions of dollars with no clear return. Wall Street analysts criticized the move. Some board members questioned whether this was a waste of resources. Jensen didn't care. He believed absolutely that GPU computing would be transformative. He kept investing in CUDA even when it didn't make financial sense. He kept building the ecosystem even when adoption was slow. This is what separates legendary CEOs from ordinary ones: the ability to see years into the future and invest in that vision even when everyone thinks you're wrong. For years, CUDA was a niche product. Universities and research labs used it. Some scientists loved it. But it wasn't a major revenue driver for NVIDIA. The company's money still came from graphics cards for gaming and, increasingly, professional visualization. CUDA was more like Jensen's expensive hobby. Then came 2012. A team of researchers at the University of Toronto, led by Geoffrey Hinton, entered an image recognition competition called ImageNet. They used a neural network called AlexNet to classify images. This wasn't new. People had been trying to build neural networks for decades with limited success. But the Toronto team did something different. They trained their neural network using NVIDIA GPUs and CUDA. The results shocked the AI research community. AlexNet didn't just win the competition. It destroyed the competition. Its error rate was 15% lower than the second-place finisher. It wasn't even close. And the reason it worked was that training the neural network on GPUs allowed the researchers to process vastly more data in reasonable timeframes than had ever been possible before. This was the moment everything changed. AI researchers around the world suddenly realized that the hardware they needed for deep learning already existed. It was NVIDIA GPUs. Within months, every major AI lab was buying NVIDIA graphics cards. Within a year, demand was so high that gamers were complaining because AI researchers were buying up all the high-end GPUs. Jensen had been preparing for this moment without even knowing it. All those years investing in CUDA, building the software ecosystem, convincing researchers to try GPU computing, it all paid off in this one explosive moment. NVIDIA suddenly wasn't just a gaming hardware company. It was the foundational infrastructure for the AI revolution. Once AI researchers discovered that GPUs were essential for deep learning, demand exploded. But Jensen didn't just ride the wave. He anticipated what would come next and positioned NVIDIA to own the entire stack. He understood that AI wasn't going to stay in research labs. It was going to move into production, into real-world applications, into every industry. NVIDIA began designing chips specifically for AI workloads. The company released the Tesla line of data center GPUs optimized for training neural networks. Then came the DGX systems, complete servers designed to make it easy for companies to deploy AI. Jensen wasn't just selling chips anymore, he was selling complete solutions. Self-driving cars needed AI to process sensor data in real time. NVIDIA developed the Drive platform. Cloud computing companies needed to offer AI services to their customers. NVIDIA partnered with Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud. Pharmaceutical companies wanted to use AI for drug discovery. NVIDIA provided the hardware and software. Every single major AI application required NVIDIA's technology. The company's revenue started growing at unprecedented rates. In 2016, NVIDIA's revenue was $6 billion. By 2020, it was nearly $17 billion. By 2024, it would exceed $60 billion. The stock price went parabolic. Investors who'd bought NVIDIA shares in the early 2010s and held on were seeing returns that seemed impossible. $1,000 invested in 2015 would be worth over $50,000 by 2024. But the most remarkable part wasn't the financial success. It was how thoroughly NVIDIA dominated the market. In the world of AI accelerators and data center GPUs, NVIDIA's market share was estimated at over 80%. 80%. When was the last time you saw a tech company with that kind of dominance? Competitors like AMD and Intel were trying desperately to catch up, but Nvidia was years ahead in both hardware and software. In November 2022, a company called OpenAI released ChatGPT to the public. Within 5 days, it had 1 million users. Within 2 months, 100 million users. It was the fastest-growing consumer application in history. People were amazed that they could have natural conversations with an AI, that it could write essays, debug code, explain complex topics, and generate creative content. But here's what most people didn't understand. ChatGPT runs on Nvidia GPUs. Every single interaction with ChatGPT requires processing on Nvidia's chips. Training the models behind ChatGPT required thousands of Nvidia GPUs running for weeks or months. OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, Meta, every company racing to build AI applications, they all needed massive quantities of Nvidia's most advanced chips. The demand was so intense that Nvidia's chips were essentially allocated, not sold. Companies couldn't just buy Nvidia's H100 chips, the latest data center GPUs. They had to get in line. Wait times were measured in months. Some companies reportedly paid premiums through third-party resellers just to get chips faster. It was like the chip shortage during COVID, except this shortage was caused by every major company simultaneously trying to build AI infrastructure. Jensen became one of the most sought-after CEOs in the world. When he spoke at conferences, the rooms were packed. When Nvidia released quarterly earnings, Wall Street hung on every word. Analysts tried to parse Nvidia's guidance to understand the future of AI. The company's market cap broke through the $1 trillion mark in 2023, making it one of only a handful of companies to reach that milestone. But $1 trillion wasn't enough. As AI continued to explode, as every company announced AI initiatives, as the realization set in that AI was going to transform every industry, Nvidia's market cap kept climbing. $2 trillion. Then in 2024, $3 trillion. Briefly making Nvidia the most valuable company in the world, surpassing even Apple and Microsoft. Jensen Huang doesn't look like a typical billionaire CEO. He's rarely seen without his signature black leather jacket. He doesn't wear suits. He doesn't project the buttoned-up image of corporate America. In many ways, he still looks like the engineer who started his company in a Denny's 30 years earlier. This isn't an accident. It's deliberate. Jensen runs Nvidia with an unusual management philosophy. The company is famously flat. Jensen has reported that he has over 50 direct reports. Most CEOs have 6 to 8 direct reports because managing more than that becomes impossible. Jensen does it anyway because he wants to be close to the work, close to the engineers actually building products. He's known for sending emails at all hours. Former employees talk about receiving detailed technical feedback from Jensen at 2 in the morning. He doesn't just set strategy, he digs into the technical details. He'll question design decisions, challenge assumptions, push teams to think differently. Some people find this management style exhausting. Others say it's what makes Nvidia special. Jensen is also famous for his public presentations. When he takes the stage at Nvidia's GTC conference, the annual gathering where the company announces new products, he's not reading from notes or clicking through boring slides. He's telling stories. He's explaining why the technology matters. He's painting a vision of the future. His presentations have become events in themselves, watched by hundreds of thousands of people online. But beneath the showmanship, there's a relentless work ethic that traces back to that kid washing dishes in Kentucky. Jensen reportedly works 7 days a week. He said in interviews that he doesn't believe in work-life balance in the traditional sense. For him, work and life are integrated. He loves what he does, and he's driven by a mission that goes beyond making money. What is that mission? Jensen talks about it constantly: accelerated computing. He believes that traditional CPU-based computing has hit a wall. Moore's law, the observation that computer chips double in performance roughly every 2 years, is slowing down. The only way to keep advancing computing power is through specialized processors like GPUs that can handle specific tasks incredibly efficiently. Nvidia's mission, as Jensen defines it, is to accelerate computing for applications that matter: scientific research, healthcare, climate modeling, and yes, artificial intelligence. Nvidia's dominance in AI chips raises an obvious question: why can't competitors catch up? Companies like AMD, Intel, and startups backed by billions in venture capital are all trying to build chips that can compete with Nvidia's GPUs. Google has its own custom AI chip called the TPU. Amazon has developed its own chips for AWS. With all this competition and all these resources, why does Nvidia maintain such a commanding lead? The answer is what Warren Buffett calls a moat, a competitive advantage that's extremely difficult to overcome. Nvidia's moat isn't just hardware. It's the complete ecosystem Jensen spent decades building. When a researcher or company wants to deploy AI, they don't just need a chip. They need software libraries, development tools, pre-trained models, documentation, and a community of developers who know how to use the platform. CUDA, that platform Jensen invested in for years when nobody cared, is now Nvidia's secret weapon. Millions of developers know how to program with CUDA. Universities teach it. Every major AI framework, TensorFlow, PyTorch, JX, they all work seamlessly with CUDA. If you're a company building AI applications, choosing Nvidia means you can hire from a huge talent pool of people who already know the tools. Choosing a competitor means retraining everyone and potentially rewriting large portions of your codebase. Then there's the hardware itself. Nvidia doesn't manufacture its own chips. That's done by TSMC in Taiwan. But Nvidia designs the chips, and those designs are protected by thousands of patents. The company has spent billions on research and development, and that R&D compounds over time. Each new generation of Nvidia GPUs builds on everything learned from previous generations. Nvidia also maintains close relationships with all the major AI research labs. When researchers at OpenAI or DeepMind or academic institutions discover that they need specific capabilities for their work, they often collaborate with Nvidia's engineers. This feedback loop means Nvidia's chips are optimized for exactly what cutting-edge AI research requires. By the time competitors reverse engineer what Nvidia has done, Nvidia is already working on the next generation. Not everything has been smooth for Jensen and Nvidia. The company faces serious challenges, and Jensen's decisions have attracted criticism from multiple directions. Let's be clear-eyed about the concerns. First, there's the geopolitical risk. Nvidia's chips are manufactured in Taiwan by TSMC. Taiwan is a focal point of tension between China and the United States. If there were ever a military conflict over Taiwan, or if China blockaded the island, Nvidia's supply chain would be devastated. Jensen has acknowledged this risk, and Nvidia is working with other manufacturers and supporting efforts to build chip fabrication facilities in the United States, but this is a vulnerability that keeps investors nervous. Second, there's regulatory pressure. The United States government has imposed restrictions on exporting advanced AI chips to China, citing national security concerns. Nvidia has had to create less powerful versions of its chips for the Chinese market. This has cost the company billions in potential revenue. Some analysts estimate that Nvidia could be missing out on 20 to 30% more revenue if not for these export restrictions. Jensen has navigated this carefully, complying with regulations while advocating for policies that allow American companies to compete globally. Third, there's the question of sustainability. Nvidia's enormous valuation is based on the assumption that demand for AI chips will continue growing exponentially. But what if the AI boom slows down? What if companies realize they've overinvested in AI infrastructure? What if new training techniques reduce the number of GPUs needed? These are legitimate concerns. Some skeptics argue that Nvidia is in a bubble, that the stock price has gotten ahead of reality, and that disappointment is inevitable. Jensen's response has been to keep pushing forward. He's invested heavily in new markets beyond AI training, including AI inference, which is the process of actually running AI models in production. He's expanded into automotive with self-driving technology. He's pushed into robotics, believing that intelligent robots will be a major market in the future. Critics say he's diversifying out of fear that the AI market will saturate. Supporters say he's doing what great CEOs do, finding the next growth opportunity before the current one peaks. There's also criticism of Nvidia's business practices. Some smaller AI companies complain that Nvidia's allocation system for chips favors big tech companies who can order in massive quantities. There have been complaints about pricing, with some suggesting that Nvidia charges monopolistic prices for its chips. Nvidia's defense is simple: they're charging what the market will bear, and if companies are willing to pay premium prices, it's because the value Nvidia provides is worth it. Understanding Jensen Huang, the person, is essential to understanding Nvidia's success. Unlike some billionaire CEOs who become increasingly disconnected from their companies as they grow wealthy, Jensen remains deeply involved in Nvidia's daily operations. His personal philosophy permeates the company culture. Jensen talks often about the importance of suffering and struggle. In interviews, he said things that sound almost harsh. He's told Stanford students that he wishes upon them ample doses of pain and suffering, because that's how character is built. He doesn't mean it cruelly, he's reflecting on his own experience. The kid who washed dishes and survived a school for troubled youth, the CEO who nearly went bankrupt 3 times, these experiences made him resilient in a way that comfort never could. This philosophy shows up in how Nvidia operates. The company is known for intense internal competition. Teams are constantly challenging each other. Products go through brutal review processes where nothing is accepted just because it's good enough. There's a culture of paranoia, a belief that competitors are always catching up and that Nvidia needs to run faster just to maintain its lead. Some former employees describe the culture as exhausting. Others say it brings out their best work. Jensen's relationship with his employees is interesting. On one hand, he demands excellence and doesn't tolerate mediocrity. On the other hand, he's known for being loyal to people who deliver results. Longtime Nvidia employees have become wealthy through stock options as the company's value has skyrocketed. The executive team has remarkably low turnover for Silicon Valley, where job hopping is the norm. Jensen has remained married to his wife Lori for over 40 years, rare in Silicon Valley where divorce rates among executives are high. They have 2 children, both adults now. Jensen is notoriously private about his family life, almost never discussing his children in interviews or public appearances. In an era where some CEOs turn their personal lives into brands, Jensen maintains a clear separation. Philanthropically, Jensen and Lori have donated tens of millions to causes they care about, particularly education. They've given money to Oregon State University, Jensen's undergraduate alma mater, to Stanford, and to various educational initiatives. Unlike some billionaires who create splashy foundations, the Huangs have been relatively quiet about their giving, preferring impact over publicity. Several key decisions Jensen made turned out to be worth billions or even hundreds of billions of dollars in value. Let's examine a few that stand out. The decision to invest in CUDA in 2006 might be the single most valuable strategic choice in modern tech history. Nvidia spent hundreds of millions developing CUDA over many years with no clear return on investment. If Jensen had cut that program to improve short-term profitability, which is what Wall Street often pressures CEOs to do, Nvidia would have been unprepared when the AI revolution hit. The company might have remained a successful gaming GPU manufacturer, but it wouldn't have become the $3 trillion behemoth it is today. That one decision to keep funding CUDA despite skepticism was worth trillions. In 2019, Nvidia tried to acquire Mellanox, a company that makes high-speed networking equipment for data centers. The price was nearly $7 billion, Nvidia's largest acquisition ever at the time. Some analysts questioned why Nvidia needed to spend that much on networking. Jensen's vision was that AI computing wasn't just about individual chips, it was about connecting thousands of chips together so they could work as one massive system. Mellanox's technology was essential for that. The acquisition closed in 2020, and it's now clear it was brilliant. Nvidia's data center revenue has exploded partly because the company can sell complete systems, not just chips. Then there was the attempted acquisition that failed. In 2020, Nvidia announced plans to acquire ARM Holdings, the company that designs the processors used in virtually every smartphone. The price was $40 billion, which would have been the biggest semiconductor acquisition in history. Jensen's vision was to combine Nvidia's GPU technology with ARM CPU designs to create even more powerful systems. But the deal faced regulatory opposition from multiple countries who worried that Nvidia owning ARM would give it too much power. After 2 years of trying to get approval, Nvidia abandoned the acquisition in 2022. Jensen had to walk away, losing the $1.25 billion breakup fee Nvidia had agreed to pay. Some saw this as a major defeat. In hindsight, it might have been a blessing. If Nvidia had spent $40 billion on ARM and the years of management attention required to integrate such a massive acquisition, it might have been distracted during the crucial 2022 to 2024 period when the AI market exploded. Sometimes what looks like failure is actually luck in disguise. Where does Jensen think technology is heading? He's remarkably consistent in his public statements about the future, and his track record suggests his predictions should be taken seriously. Jensen believes we're at the beginning of a complete reinvention of computing. He argues that every application, every piece of software, every digital service will eventually be rebuilt to incorporate AI. This isn't optional or a nice-to-have feature. It's fundamental. Companies that don't incorporate AI into their core products will be disrupted by competitors who do. He compares this moment to the shift from mainframe computers to personal computers, or from desktop computing to mobile. It's not just a new feature, it's a platform shift. He's particularly excited about what he calls physical AI, which means AI that interacts with and understands the physical world. This includes robots, autonomous vehicles, drones, and manufacturing systems. Jensen believes that just as ChatGPT understands language because it was trained on vast amounts of text, future AIs will understand physics because they'll be trained on vast amounts of data from the real world. Nvidia is investing heavily in simulation platforms that allow companies to train robots in virtual environments before deploying them in reality. Jensen also talks about the concept of AI factories. Traditional factories make physical products. AI factories, which are really just large data centers full of Nvidia GPUs, make intelligence. They take in data and electricity and output trained AI models. This framing recontextualizes what Nvidia sells. It's not selling gaming hardware or even tech products. It's selling the machinery that produces the most valuable commodity of the future, artificial intelligence. On quantum computing, Jensen has been more measured. While some tech leaders hype quantum as the next revolution, Jensen has pointed out that quantum computers are still decades away from practical applications for most problems. He's not dismissing quantum computing. Nvidia even develops software for quantum simulation. But he's pragmatic about timelines. This is classic Jensen, optimistic about technology he believes in, skeptical about hype. He's also been vocal about the importance of sovereign AI, the idea that countries need their own AI infrastructure rather than relying entirely on American cloud providers. This might seem like it contradicts Nvidia's interests, but Jensen sees it as expanding the market. If every country wants its own AI capabilities, they all need Nvidia chips. It's a way of growing the pie rather than fighting over slices. Let's talk about money. As of 2024, Jensen Huang's net worth fluctuates between $70 and $100 billion depending on Nvidia's stock price. He owns roughly 3.5% of Nvidia, which doesn't sound like much until you realize the company is worth over $3 trillion. That small percentage equals tens of billions. But here's what makes Jensen different from many billionaires. He's never sold significant amounts of stock to diversify or cash out. Most founders sell portions of their holdings over time, both for diversification and to enjoy their wealth. Jensen has sold relatively little. His wealth is almost entirely tied up in Nvidia stock. This means two things. First, he has enormous confidence in the company's future. Second, his interests are perfectly aligned with shareholders. When Nvidia succeeds, Jensen gets richer. When Nvidia struggles, he feels the pain directly. This creates an unusual dynamic. Jensen is theoretically one of the richest people on Earth, but his lifestyle doesn't scream excess. He's not buying megayachts or collecting exotic cars or building massive compounds. He lives relatively modestly for a billionaire, still in the same Bay Area home he's had for years. The leather jacket he wears isn't some designer piece, it's a practical garment he likes. This frugality isn't virtue signaling. It's consistent with his character. The man who learned the value of hard work as a dishwasher hasn't forgotten those lessons. The CEO who nearly went bankrupt multiple times remains cautious even in prosperity. Jensen seems genuinely more excited about what Nvidia is building than about personal consumption. That said, the wealth brings responsibility and scrutiny. As AI becomes more central to society, Nvidia's power raises important questions. Should one company have this much control over AI infrastructure? Is it healthy for the AI revolution to depend so heavily on one manufacturer? These aren't easy questions, and Jensen doesn't have perfect answers. What he does have is a track record of advancing technology in ways that benefit society broadly, not just Nvidia's bottom line. The story of Nvidia's dominance is also the story of competitors who tried and failed to catch up. Understanding why these efforts fell short reveals just how formidable Jensen built Nvidia to be. AMD, Nvidia's oldest rival in graphics cards, has been trying to break into the data center AI market for years. AMD makes excellent GPUs for gaming and has made strides in AI chips. But despite being technically capable and often cheaper than Nvidia, AMD's market share in AI remains small. The problem isn't hardware quality, it's ecosystem. Developers don't want to rewrite their code from CUDA to AMD's competing platform called ROCm. Companies don't want to retrain their engineers. The switching costs are simply too high unless AMD offers something dramatically better, not just incrementally better or cheaper. Intel, once the undisputed king of computing chips, has struggled even more. Intel dominated the CPU market for decades and had opportunities to lead in GPUs and AI accelerators. They didn't take them seriously. By the time Intel realized that AI chips were going to be massive, Nvidia had a 10-year head start. Intel has invested billions trying to catch up, acquiring companies, developing new chips, building software platforms. So far, they've made limited progress. Intel's struggles show that even with unlimited resources, catching a well-executed competitor who saw the future first is incredibly difficult. Then there are the big tech companies building their own chips. Google's TPUs are genuinely good at certain AI workloads, particularly for Google's own services. Amazon's custom chips for AWS are gaining traction. Microsoft is developing its own AI accelerators. But here's the thing, these custom chips are typically designed for very specific use cases within those companies. They're not general-purpose solutions that other companies can easily adopt. And even Google, Amazon, and Microsoft continue to buy massive quantities of Nvidia GPUs because their custom chips don't solve every problem. Startups have tried too. Companies like Cerebras, Graphcore, and SambaNova have raised hundreds of millions or even billions in venture capital to build AI chips that could compete with Nvidia. Some have interesting technical approaches, but none have achieved meaningful market share. The startup approach works great for software, where you can iterate quickly and distribution costs are low. For hardware, especially complex chips that require years of development and enormous capital investment, taking on an entrenched leader like Nvidia is extraordinarily difficult. The consistent pattern is that competitors underestimated how important the software ecosystem would be. They thought AI chips were a hardware problem. Jensen understood it was a platform problem, a complete solution problem, an ecosystem problem. That insight, combined with a decade-plus head start, created a moat that even the smartest competitors with billions of dollars can't easily cross. What can other leaders learn from Jensen Huang's journey? Several principles emerge from studying his career that apply far beyond semiconductors and AI. First, the power of long-term thinking. Jensen made investments in CUDA and GPU computing for scientific applications years before they paid off. He could have focused purely on quarterly earnings and kept Nvidia as a gaming company. Instead, he played the long game. In an era where CEOs are often judged quarter by quarter and activist investors push for short-term returns, Jensen's willingness to invest in multi-year vision stands out. The lesson: if you truly believe in a technological shift, invest in it consistently even when the immediate returns aren't obvious. Second, the importance of being close to the technical details. Jensen isn't a typical CEO who focuses only on strategy and delegation. He understands the technology deeply, engages with engineering decisions, and maintains technical credibility. This allows him to make better strategic choices because he can assess what's actually possible versus what's hype. It also earns respect from engineers, who are often skeptical of executives who don't understand the work. The lesson: in technical industries, CEOs who remain engaged with the details make better decisions. Third, resilience in the face of near-death experiences. Nvidia almost died at least 3 times in its early years. Many founders would have given up, taken acquisition offers, or pivoted to easier businesses. Jensen persisted through brutal periods when most people would have quit. This resilience wasn't blind optimism. It was grounded in a deep belief in the mission combined with willingness to make hard decisions like canceling the Sega deal. The lesson: endurance and willingness to make painful choices often separate successful founders from everyone else. Fourth, the value of building ecosystems, not just products. The most important thing Nvidia built wasn't any single chip. It was the CUDA platform and the community around it. Jensen understood that the company with the best developer ecosystem wins, even if their hardware isn't perfect. He invested in making Nvidia's platform easy to use, well-documented, and deeply integrated with popular tools. The lesson: in technology, the platform often matters more than the product. Fifth, authentic leadership. Jensen's leather jacket, his passionate presentations, his hands-on management style, these aren't calculated personal branding. They're genuinely who he is. He doesn't try to be the conventional CEO. He's brought his full personality to his role, and it works because it's authentic. People follow leaders they believe are genuine. The lesson: being yourself, even if unconventional, often works better than trying to fit into a prescribed leadership mold. There's usually a moment in every great business story when you can see everything coming together, when years of preparation meet opportunity. For Nvidia and Jensen, that moment was 2023. The groundwork had been laid over decades. CUDA had been building quietly since 2006. The AI research community had been growing since 2012. Data centers had been adopting GPUs steadily. But in 2023, it all exploded simultaneously. ChatGPT's viral success in late 2022 made AI real to ordinary people. Suddenly, everyone from tech CEOs to government officials to average consumers understood that AI was transformative. The race was on. Microsoft invested $10 billion in OpenAI. Google declared a code red and rushed to deploy its AI. Meta open-sourced its AI models. Amazon accelerated AWS AI services. Every major tech company simultaneously decided that AI was existential. And they all needed the same thing: Nvidia GPUs. Demand didn't just increase, it exploded. Companies went from ordering thousands of chips to ordering hundreds of thousands. Cloud providers expanded their data centers. New startups raised billions specifically to buy GPUs and build AI services. Jensen had the only product that could meet this demand at scale. Yes, competitors existed, but the time to switch to a competitor's ecosystem wasn't when you're racing to deploy AI before your rivals. Everyone needed Nvidia chips, and they needed them immediately. The company that had nearly gone bankrupt 3 times was now in the extraordinary position of having more demand than it could fulfill even with TSMC manufacturing chips as fast as possible. The financial results reflected this perfect storm. In early 2024, Nvidia reported quarterly revenue of over $26 billion, up over 200% from the previous year. Think about that. A company with annual revenue of $27 billion the previous year was now doing that much in a single quarter. The profit margins were extraordinary because demand was so high that Nvidia had pricing power. This is the moment Jensen had been working toward for 30 years, even if he couldn't have predicted exactly how it would unfold. Every decision, every investment, every product cycle had been building to this. The ecosystem thinking, the long-term vision, the technical depth, the resilience through near-death experiences, it all paid off in this moment of unprecedented demand meeting perfect preparation. So where does the story go from here? Jensen is 61 years old as of 2024. He shows no signs of slowing down or stepping back. But succession planning is a real question for Nvidia. The company's success is deeply tied to Jensen's vision and leadership. What happens when he eventually steps down? Jensen hasn't publicly named a successor, which is typical for someone who plans to keep working. But he's built a deep executive team, many of whom have been with the company for decades. The institutional knowledge and culture are strong enough that Nvidia could likely continue successfully under new leadership, though it would certainly be different without Jensen's unique approach. The technology roadmap is ambitious. Nvidia continues releasing new GPU architectures every 2 years, each generation offering significant performance improvements over the last. The company is expanding beyond just chips into complete systems, software platforms, and services. The vision is to own more of the value chain in AI computing, from hardware to software to cloud services. Geopolitically, Nvidia is navigating increasingly complex terrain. The US-China tech competition, the importance of Taiwan to chip manufacturing, the desire of many countries to develop their own AI capabilities, these factors create both opportunities and risks. Jensen has proven adept at navigating these challenges, but they're only going to intensify. The biggest question is whether AI demand will continue at current rates. Bulls argue that we're still in the early innings, that AI will transform every industry, and that computing demand will grow for decades. Bears argue that we're in a bubble, that returns on AI investment won't justify the spending, and that demand will crash. Jensen's position is clear. He believes the transformation is real and sustained. What's certain is that Jensen has already secured his legacy. Even if Nvidia's stock price never rises from current levels, even if the AI boom moderates, Jensen has built one of the most consequential technology companies of the early 21st century. He saw the importance of parallel computing when others didn't. He invested in AI infrastructure before it was fashionable. He built an ecosystem that positioned Nvidia perfectly for the AI revolution. Let's come back to where we started. A kid who washed dishes. A teenager who survived a school for troubled youth. An immigrant who arrived in America with almost nothing. That kid is now one of the most important business leaders in the world, running a company worth trillions of dollars that's enabling the AI revolution. But here's what makes Jensen's story truly remarkable. It's not just about personal success. Yes, he became incredibly wealthy. Yes, he built an enormously valuable company. But the real story is about impact. The work that Nvidia enables goes far beyond making gamers happy or making shareholders rich. Researchers using Nvidia GPUs are discovering new drugs, potentially saving millions of lives. Climate scientists are running better models to understand and address climate change. Physicists are simulating the universe's fundamental properties. Engineers are designing safer cars and planes. Doctors are diagnosing diseases earlier and more accurately. The list goes on. Jensen didn't set out to change the world. He set out to build great graphics chips. But by seeing further than others, by investing in platforms and ecosystems, by persisting through failure, and by having the technical depth to make good long-term bets, he ended up creating infrastructure that's accelerating human progress. There's a broader lesson in this story that goes beyond business strategy or technical vision. It's about the power of believing in yourself when others doubt you. Every expert told Jensen that graphics chips for gamers wasn't a big enough market. He didn't listen. Investors questioned why he was wasting money on CUDA. He kept funding it. Analysts said Nvidia was just a gaming company. He proved them wrong. This isn't a story about being contrarian for its own sake. Jensen wasn't different just to be different. He was different because he saw something real that others missed. And he had the courage and resilience to pursue that vision even when it wasn't working, even when the company nearly failed, even when the market didn't immediately validate his choices. The kid who washed dishes learned that survival requires doing whatever it takes. The CEO who nearly went bankrupt 3 times learned that resilience beats talent when things get hard. The engineer who became a billionaire never forgot that the technology matters more than the money. And the immigrant who came to America with nothing proved that with vision, hard work, and persistence, you really can change the world. Jensen Huang's story is still being written. Nvidia's next chapter is still unfolding. But what's already clear is that this is one of the great business success stories of our time. From a Denny's booth to a $3 trillion company. From washing dishes to powering artificial intelligence. From an immigrant kid to the CEO who saw the future. That's the story of Jensen Huang. And it's a reminder that the most important breakthroughs often come from people who others underestimated, who saw possibilities others missed, and who refused to give up even when success seemed impossible. In the end, the dishwasher didn't just build a company. He built the foundation for the future of computing, and possibly humanity itself. If this story inspired you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We dive deep into the lives of the world's most successful CEOs and entrepreneurs, uncovering the real stories behind their success. Drop a comment below. What part of Jensen's journey inspired you most? And what billionaire CEO should we cover next? Thanks for watching, and remember, every successful person you admire started somewhere nobody expected. Your story could be next.